Michigan Congressman Peter Meijer, who flew to Kabul last week. What did you witness and observe there, Congressman? And has anything improved, do you think, since then?
Yeah, what we saw was actually quite a bit of order within the airport itself. There have been prior reports of up to 18,000 who are awaiting flights out. We didn't witness that, or maybe a few hundred who were rapidly being processed. But what we did see was a very vulnerable security situation. At that airport, we were entirely dependent on the Taliban for perimeter security to keep the crowds away, for crowd control. I was really stunned by how much cooperation was frankly needed and how dependent we were on Taliban as the security force there. Now, obviously, we had several thousand troops still on the ground then, but those troops were defending the immediate perimeter, and then that kind of cordon just outside was being manned by the Taliban. There were plenty of cases of Americans who were not able to get through or who were being beaten. But it did look like, at least in the majority of circumstances, the Taliban were allowing individuals through that the U.S. had approved or who had the right paperwork. The irony of that situation was not lost on anyone who was there. The absurdity, the way in which it was a world turned upside down. I would have people kind of sit next to me and say, a month ago I was trying to kill these guys, and now we sit across the table from each other, talking about our plans and making sure we're all on the same page. So it's utterly bizarre. But I just have to say that the men and women on the ground there, our Marines, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our diplomatic personnel, just top notch, given an impossible position, being in a position they should have never been put in the first place, but doing their level best to make sure we get as many people through as quickly as possible and as safely as possible.
You alluded to the fact that we might be relying or taking the Taliban's word a little too much, putting a little too much into that. Do you think that's the case?
I mean, we do not have an option. That was what I really walked away from, is this is not this type of situation where you say, well, do we work with the Taliban or don't we? Given the dynamics, given the fact that we have that small airport with a single runway in a dense urban neighborhood, you have tens of thousands of people trying to come in, some of whom have the right documentation and are permissible, some of whom aren't, but all, are seeking that kind of better opportunity and better life. And so this was a really tough situation to put individuals in, and the extreme risk they were undertaking was made painfully clear by the horrific attack at Abbey Gate on Thursday that caused the loss of life of 11 Marines, a soldier, and a Navy corpsman.
Did you ever fear for your life when you went over there on this trip with Congressman Moulton? There had been warnings that, something like that could have happened that happened on Thursday. We saw drone strikes conducted over the weekend to prevent other attacks like that.
To be honest, no. I've also lived in Afghanistan for a few years.
Right.
So warnings of threats, some of which are realized, are something I'm pretty used to. Again, our goal was to get there as quietly as possible, make as little impact on the ground as possible, and get out the information we needed and the understanding we needed without causing disruption, but especially without raising the threat profile of that base. Now, the CIA director, we later learned, was visiting earlier that morning as well. So we certainly weren't the only non-military personnel on there.
Now, John Kirby, the Pentagon press secretary, a little bit after your trip said that you and Congressman Moulton certainly took away from what we had been planning to do that day. There was somewhat of a small, controversy surrounding your trip. People thought other members of Congress might go. What do you respond to that?
Yeah, our plan was to be wholly independent of the military in its entirety. We had prepared to have a civilian network of folks who are working at that airfield to take us around so that we would have no requirement for anything on the military side. Now, we did end up taking a U.S. military flight out that had available seats. We actually waited a few flights for one that had some free jump seats because somebody in the Biden administration leaked to the Washington Post that we were there. And again, we did not want to cause an elevated profile. One senior officer who was there did allow us to use his vehicle at his repeated insistence and at our repeated insistence that we not take away any resources there. But I think in general, but I think in general, I think that's one of the challenges of any, location like that is we did take away maybe 10 or 15 minutes from a few folks just to ask their thoughts on what was transpiring, ask them what resources they needed, ask them what messages they wanted us to take back. Some of those individuals, and we always preface with, if you have something else right now, we do not need to talk. And a few were very blunt and said, honestly, this is my downtime. I'm happy to talk. If I didn't have time, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now. So I will say the majority of the impression, or the majority of the responses we got when we were there, first words were, thank you for coming. There was a lot of folks who felt, I think, a little bit forgotten, but that they were at the end of the world. Now, all eyes were on that airport in a lot of ways on the evacuation side, but there still was this sense that they were at the tail end of something, and that they were really, kind of at that brink.
Yeah, and just last question for you, Congressman. Thank you for your time. Over 100,000 people have already been evacuated. A lot of your colleagues, though, both members of both parties have called for extending this deadline. The president's quite adamant that he's not going to do that. A lot of your colleagues as well calling for resignations within the administration. It just raises the question, do you think the Taliban will let people leave the country post August 31st?
All we can do right now is hope. The amount of leverage we have is minimal. We both went there expecting that we wanted to make the case to extend that deadline, that was the most important thing, that we needed to get our troops more time to complete their mission. After seeing the dynamics on the ground and knowing that the Taliban would not allow that, and don't get me wrong, we could go back to war with the Taliban and kill a lot of them, and they would kill some of our service members. But if the goal was to go and break that agreement to extend beyond so we could get more people out, we wouldn't be able to do that. Those individuals would be caught in the crossfire and killed by the scores. Those individuals would be probably held in some type of hostage, like situation. If again, we were to start up combat with the Taliban again to resume that conflict. So we came out of there believing that we needed to stick to that deadline, but more so that we knew people would get left behind, that we did not have any viable options there. And so we needed to prepare and plan for how we get people out after tomorrow, after August 31st.
And some of your colleagues are also concerned that Afghanistan could become yet again a safe harbor for terrorists, of course, ISIS-K, but other groups as well. That's also a concern, is it not?
I think it's one of the paramount concerns. The botched withdrawal, just the chaos and the catastrophe over the past couple of weeks has been probably the most inspiring, galvanizing moment for the international jihadist, Salafist, terrorist, community in their history. The Taliban defeated us. And not only did they defeat us, but looking at how we had to leave, at how quickly Kabul fell, how quickly the US-backed regime disintegrated, it is an embarrassment for our Western, ambitions there, for our 20-year mission. And if you are a terrorist group right now, you feel pretty good about yourself, and that is shameful. It should not be the case. We need to double our vigilance in that regard, but also appreciate that how we have been conducting this war on terror has not moved us to a safer place. How we have, inspired the creation of new groups through our military activities overseas, how that has only metastasized the threat that was there, is something we should pay very close attention to, because if we keep doing the same thing, Americans will keep dying.
And we're 13 days out from the 20th anniversary of 9/11. A large majority of those who lost their lives Thursday were either not born or just babies on 9/11. So what does that say, though, to our footprint over there? What do Americans kind of need to be thinking about going forward into that anniversary?
I think it's a moment for reflection. It's a moment for taking stock of where we are. And it's a moment to commit to making sure that we're never putting American men and women in the position that we put them in, not only over the past 2.5 weeks, but also over the past nearly 2 decades. I think it's really hard to rack up, to look at the moment today, look back and say that this has been executed well, that this, whatever mission we set out to do was accomplished. That's something that we really need to take to heart to ensure it never happens again, and that we learn learn right and make sure we go forward with a better strategy.
All right. Congressman Peter Meijer, Republican from Michigan, thank you for joining us here on Live Now from Fox today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.